Hi, guys, and welcome to another edition of The Big Shift. I've got an unbelievable story for you today of a guy a lot of people would say, I've talked to a lot of the guys, especially the New York guys, who would say that this family was certainly very, very, very central. And they was, in a sense, a kind of known as mob royalty. Coming next. Hi, guys. Welcome back. Today, we're going into the story of a family of the father, a very senior figure in the Gambino family, a very historic family, a real trigger man from back in the day, guys. Before we get there, I've got to say a big thank you to everyone who's going into the subscription model, www.stephengillen.com. You guys are getting the book in there, The Monkey Puzzle Tree. Of course, that's going to be a film. I have to say to you guys, look, there's another book coming. It's called Injustice, Love, and Honor. I'm going to talk more about that another time. But now we're going to get straight into the content. He's a really good guy, knows a lot of the friends and the people that we talk to. I've been waiting to get this guy on, a wonderful guy. Today, my guest is Anthony Ruggiano. Hi, Anthony. How you doing? Welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Steve. It's my pleasure. It's been a while.
we've been trying to get each other. There's been a couple of times, hasn't there, Anthony?
Yes.
But look, I'm really, really happy to have you here. As I said, look, I know a lot of your friends. I'm privileged, a lot of your friends, a lot of the historic stuff that went on back in the day. They all speak highly of you and your father and your family. That was very central in them days, and Ozone Park in Queens. And in Brooklyn, Your father was a made man in the Gambino family, Fat Andy. He was a very central figure. Should we start there? Do you want to tell me a little bit about your father?
So, in the beginning, my father actually was with the Mangano family, which was the family. It was the Gambino family, but at first it was called the Mangano family. So when my father got out of prison in the early 50s, he was actually running around Brooklyn with his partner, Tony Lee, and they were young kids, and they were actually sticking up poker games in the Brooklyn area. And what happened, this wise guy named Charlie Wagons, who was in East New York, Brooklyn, reached out to this fellow named Albert Mayoni, whose brother was in Murders Incorporated, Happy Mayoni. He got the electric chair with Abe Rella, so it's very historic. So these sort of were the guys that raised my father, because my grandfather passed away when my father was 8 years old. So he had no father. So his father figures were all mob guys, Murders Incorporated. His best friends, they were their uncles and their fathers. So he was robbing these poker games, and Charlie reached out to this fella, Albert Mayoni, and asked him who this kid Andy is that's robbing these games. And he told him it's Liberty's kid brother, which is my uncle. And he asked Albert to, do you think you could get the money back? And Albert told him, no, either you got to kill this kid or give him a job, because he's not going to give you the money back. So Charlie met with my father and actually hired him. My father started driving him around. And that's how it started. That's how my father's road into the mob started. He started driving this wise guy, Charlie Wagons, around, and he introduced him to Albert Anastasia and to Anil Delacroce and all these people. And he was only in his early 20s at the time. And the story that was told to me through my father, he told me that one day Charlie approached him and asked him if he would be, if they asked him to kill somebody, would he be willing to do it without asking any questions? And he said yes. And that's right before he committed his first violent act of that nature. And then when he was 25, he actually did his first piece of work for the Mangano family at the time. But Albert was the boss because Mangano had disappeared. And then Albert Anastasia became the boss. And so that was my father's introduction into that family. And that crew, the central regime that my father was in, was actually Albert Anastasia's main crew that did all the work, all the killings and all the assassinations. Well, that was that crew. So my father at a young age was running around, and Albert used to call him the Kid. That was his nicknames. My father used to say, Albert used to say, send the Kid. And my father used to make a joke of it. He goes, yeah, I was 25. They used to send for me. I used to go to Manhattan. They used to give me a pair of gloves and a gun and say, go in there. No, he said, never no money, just a pair of gloves and a gun. Yeah. But, and that was it, you know, and then he became a made member in 1953. The books were actually closed at the time, but because of his actions, he was what they called a special case, and Albert straightened them out at 26 years old, which was 1953. It was the same year I was born, and, you know, it went on from there. It went on from there. Actually, I'll give you a little piece of history. Actually, right before that, when I'm sure everybody heard the story about Frank Costello getting shot in the hallway, grazed his head. Later on, they found out it was the chin that did it, you know, Gigante. But when it first happened, back then, my father actually got rounded up because the description also fit my father, a stocky guy that, you know, walked side to side, because my father was he was 5'10", but he was very stocky. And they actually picked my father up and took him to the hallway and made him run up and down the hallway, the detectives and the FBI. It wasn't him. So I asked my father one day when I got older, I says, how do I know it wasn't you? He goes, because if it was me, he would have been dead. Yeah.
Look,
so, yeah.
That's a great story. Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah. For the viewers, Anthony, I just want to go back a little bit, because I want to put some foundational stuff down for people who may, to hook them in for a bit more. So the books was open for your father, which was a rare thing, right? You know, so we're going right the way back at the times of Albert Anastasia, the Mad Hatter. You know, we know he was killed in the Sheraton, right? You know, in the barber shop there. But we're going right back to the times of Lucky Luciano, you know, with Murder Incorporated, all of this stuff. So this was the environment that your father come up in, right?
Yes.
Now I want to go there. I want to go there because, you know, to me these was really historic times in the mob. Obviously, it's different now. We're going to get to that, but in them days, this was a very, very historic time. And Albert Anastasia, just like John Gotti later, he actually maneuvered his boss and he killed him too, right?
Right, exactly. Yes, Mangano. He was Mangano's underboss, and he actually took control of the family by killing Mangano. He disappeared Mangano, and Albert Anastasia became the boss. And then the commission ruled that it would be against the rules to kill another boss, that bosses weren't allowed to get killed without the whole commission voting on it. Because my father always used to tell me that Albert Anastasia was the toughest man he ever met. And he said Carlo Gambino was the smartest man he ever met. So after Carl engineered Albert Anastasia's murder, he put that rule in place. But before that, when Albert was the underboss, Albert Anastasia controlled Murders Incorporated, who did all the killing for the commission, and then Mangano disappeared and Albert became the boss. And in 53, when the books were closed, my father did so much stuff for Albert that they straightened him out because of what he did, because of the missions he went on, and he got straightened out. And then the books didn't actually open until 2 years later, until 55. That's when the books opened.
Look, this is a lot of history. It's very, very historic. So, look, you know, I mean, there's a lesson in there for me, Anthony, as well, you know, which I kind of know and I had to learn is brains is always going to beat brawn, right? Every time. Every time, right? But, you know, but there's a bit of history that from that point, and this is what changed, you know, about the commission, about you couldn't kill a boss, right? So that's so look, for you growing up, what kind of man was your father to you? What did you see him as?
I always knew he was special. I mean, as a little kid, I always knew, you know, he always got treated special. Whenever he took me with him, people catered to him. And I always knew there was something different about him than my uncles even, and my friends' fathers, because of the way he was treated when he took me out. When he took me to restaurants, the owners would always sit with us. And it was always, he got what he wanted, the best tables. You know, we always sat and he took us to baseball games. We always had great seats. He would take me to his bar on the weekends and everybody would cater to him. They would stick money in my pocket. So I always felt kind of special around him as a young kid, but I didn't know what he was into. But I knew it was something because he would tell me that when I went to school, if they asked me what he did for a living, to say he worked in a dry cleaners, because he had some guy with him that owned dry cleaners and he was on their books. But I knew inside me that he didn't work there, but I was a little kid, but so I really couldn't internalize it, but I just knew it wasn't true, but I said it anyway. In school, I would say my father worked in a dry cleaners, but I always knew as a young kid, it wasn't true. And my life lessons were different than my friends and my cousins. You know, and then as I got older, I would say when I was in my very early teens, 13, 14, when I started venturing out into the neighborhood, like getting off my block and venturing out to like the pizzeria, to the corner, to the schoolyard, the older guys would always point me out and they would whisper and I would hear them say, "That's Fat Andy's son," you know, and through that venturing out is when I learned that who my father was, what he was into, and also I read some newspaper articles about him, and then I knew that he was mobbed up. But I always knew something because there was always men in my house with suits and ties. There was always, you know, and, you know, he would go to the Copacabana and, you know, but I always knew something was going on, but I just didn't know why until I became a young teen. And what happened was when I started venturing out to the neighborhood, what he did was he would take me with him when I was like 14, and he would bring me to social clubs in the neighborhood to introduce me to the wise guys because he wanted them to know I was his son so they wouldn't beat me up if they saw me do something wrong. That's actually the first time I actually met John Gotti was when I was 13 or 14. He took me to the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, which was Charlie Wagner's club also. And I knew Charlie all my life. That was the man that straightened out my father. I always knew him. And he took me, and that's the first time I was actually introduced to John Gotti was, you know, my father said, "This is my son. So if you see him around, you know, I want you to know that's my son."
Look out for him. Yeah,
that was the first time I actually met John and Angelo Quack Quack, actually. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So this is, look, you know, this is a very classical story, Anthony, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, where that would go on like that. You'd go to the clubs, look, this is my boy. Look out for him. He's a good boy. You see him around. You know who he is. Keep an eye on him, right?
Exactly.
So look, you know, we're going to go straight into the content because, right, so we're talking about Albert Anastasia in them days, right? So as it comes on later, you know, because I know you went on from that and you was very, you know, you were central in the Gambino family there, obviously because of that.
Right.
So look, what was your view then later? Because a lot of people, Anthony, they get this wrong. They just don't understand. They kind of haven't lived like that, and they just don't get it, right? So, what did you know? A lot of them say, "Oh, Johnny killed the boss and this and that and all that stuff." He did, but what is your view then? So years later, on John Gotti and Sammy the Bull, Gravano, what happened? Bearing in mind our history repeated itself before. With Albert Anastasia.
Right. Well, with Albert, let's start with Albert first. So when Albert was always at odds with Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino was Albert's captain. Now, this is all stuff my father told me throughout the years because my father's captain was called Tommy Rava. He was my father's captain. He was Arnel Della Croce's captain, who later became Carl's underboss. And that regime did all the work, the murders for Albert. But they were at odds. He was always at odds with Gambino. So Gambino, he went behind Albert's back and got in cahoots with Vito Genovese, who didn't like Albert Anastasia, and they killed Albert. Actually, when Albert died, my father was actually driving to Manhattan with his partner, Tony Lee, who had just got straightened out, to actually meet with Albert and all of them, because he used to go to Manhattan a few times a week. He was actually driving, and he heard it on the radio. And he stopped and called Arnel up, and Arnel said, "Don't come to the city. They just killed Albert in the barbershop." So what happened after that, my father's captain disappeared. When Carl became the boss, my father's captain was murdered. He disappeared, and my father and all of them went on the lam. They were actually trying to kill Carl. They had a plan in place to try to kill Carl because they were Albert's main men. And Carl's cousin had got killed and Carl wasn't happy. But eventually, Carl called them all in. And my father was called into Albert's house one at a time. And Carl told my father, you were a soldier, you only took orders. And he took them all back. And he made Arnel Della Croce the captain. And actually, after that, that crew became Carlo Gambino's main hit crew. And they did all the work for Carl. Now you fast forward to John. John was in a be kill situation because of the heroin. Paul wanted Angelo Quack Quack's tapes. That was a death sentence. Paul was against drugs. So there was no way John was going to give Paul the tapes. And I was there at that point. Tony Lee was still alive. And nobody liked Paul. So Angelo really, Quack put it together. He's the one that put it together with all the other captains, with Frankie DeChico and a couple of other families, the Colombos, the Bananos, but the West Side and the Lucchese's weren't in on it. And then when Paul got killed, John became the boss. And then they killed Frankie DeChico. Then there was retaliation because he didn't have permission to do that. And the old school guys like the Chin and the Lucchese's, who had a lot of old school guys, didn't like the idea that Paul got killed like that. And they retaliated and killed Bobby Borriello. They blew Frankie DeChico up. So there was some retaliation, and John had to straighten it all out and get it right.
Yeah, that's some real inside history there that's bang on. Quack Quack, he died of cancer later on, but of course with the drug thing, you know, and then Frankie DeChico, he was blown up in the car bomb, right? So that, you know, that makes sense. Is, you know, guys are going to say, well, hold on a minute, we put this rule down. If it's him today, it's going to be me tomorrow. Right. You know, at the end of the day, there has to be a law here. Exactly. That's just to clarify it for some people who, you know, maybe a bit confused there. So as it went on, you know, and everyone knows about John Gotti, how flamboyant he was. Now, Anthony, both of us know some gangsters are flamboyant. It's just the way that it is. They dress well, they're confident, they have a magnetism about, you know, they have to be that. This is the life that they live. They have to be forceful in what they do and how they are. Some are just like that. Now, there's a big thing that's made about John because, in the sense, you could say that was the beginning of the end. I mean, that's open to discussion, right? But what do you think that happened really after on what transpired between Sammy the Bull, Gravano, and him? What's your view on that? Well,
what I know of the situation. So after Paul got killed and Frankie got blown up, Frankie was the underboss. When after Frankie got blown up, John needed someone to make that had and that was well liked by the Brooklyn, like by Paul Castellano's men. There was a lot of guys in Brooklyn, like Jimmy Brown. He was a very powerful captain. Danny Marino. There was a lot of people there, a lot of Sicilians that were there. That John needed someone that could talk to them, that was friendly with them, and that could work with them. And Sammy was in the right place at the right time. And Sammy was that guy. He was, you know, from that neighborhood. He knew all of them. He was raised with all of them, and he could put that together and to make the family a whole. And that's why he was chosen, because John needed someone to facilitate these guys in Brooklyn. You know, even later on, when John was arrested, because when I was away in federal prison, John even made a remark that after Sammy flipped and became an informant, John made a remark to some guys in the MCC that if Fat Andy was home, I wouldn't be in this position, because he would have probably made my father the underboss, because my father could have done the same thing, because he was very well liked by that Brooklyn crew, because they had a lot of money, they had a lot of power. You know, Paul Castellano, them guys had a lot of influence, so he needed someone to put it together, and Sammy was the guy. Sammy was a tough guy. I mean, you know, I know Sammy well. You know, Sammy used to stand at attention. You know, Sammy was a tough guy. You know, I always got along well with him. And at the end of the day, you know, when they were in MCC, from what I know is, you know, they were going to throw Sammy under the bus, and he did what he did.
Make sure to subscribe, go into StephenGillen.com and sign up for more wonderful content to expedite, help, and support you on your own personal journey of success.